For a bit of context, I work at a gas station in the backwoods of Tennessee, and that's where this happened. Last night when I clocked in at 8, the store was completely dead. I figured it was going to be a pretty easy night because the road this station is on is not the main road. Actually, it used to be up until about a decade ago when a new freeway was built. This led basically every business that was here to pack up and leave their old building abandoned. Thanks to this, there are a lot of abandoned buildings on this stretch of road that local druggies tend to claim as their own. Anyways, at around 11, I only had an hour left of my shift, and so I figured I should actually get some work done instead of just sitting around and doing nothing. I'm 18, and so I work the shift alone, which is nice because it means I can do pretty much whatever I want. This is normally pretty great because I can do whatever I want so long as I get what I need to get done finished. I noticed we were almost out of barbecue chips, and so I need to go get them from our storage space, which is for some reason in the basement of the station. I've always hated going down there, just because it gives me the creeps. Why the owner decided to store everything down there is beyond my comprehension. I got about halfway down the steps before something fell on the other side of the room, and it sounded like footsteps were coming my way. I sprinted up the stairs and locked the door to the basement, panicking like a madman the entire time. When I got back upstairs, I went behind the counter to the store computer so I could check the security cameras. I flicked over to the one that looks into the basement, and there was this guy just standing there smiling up into the camera. He had a look of absolute insanity in his eyes, but he didn't look like the average junkie in the area. He was clean-shaven and dressed in what looked to be jeans and a button-up of some kind. Honestly, if he'd walked into the store, I wouldn't have batted an eye, but because he was down there, and he was just looking into the camera smiling. It shook me to my core. I called the store owner, and at first he was pretty mad I called him in the middle of the night, but once he heard how freaked out I was, his tone changed. He told me he'd be there in 15 minutes, and just to lock the main door to the store and make sure the man didn't go anywhere. I asked if I should call the police, but for some reason, he didn't want me to do that just yet. I locked the entrance to the gas station and went back to looking at the man. He was still there just smiling up at me. About 3 or so minutes of him staring at me later, and he walked out of view of the camera. My boss showed up soon after armed with a shotgun, and when I let him in, he immediately went to the basement. I went with him just because I felt safe with there being another person there, and all but we found nothing. My boss ultimately chalked this up to me being tired and hallucinating the man, but I know what I saw. This has me scared shitless as I clock back into work in a few hours, and I'm really dreading it. Sorry for rambling, but I just needed to get this off my chest as it scared me to my core. I worked at a servo in a big, well-known city streetwalker area. Most of the roadside professionals were friendly enough and would come in for a drink, snacks, condoms, and to use the toilet. Most of the time, it was fine, but a couple of nights stood out for me. Worked the Saturday afternoon shift, 3 to 11 p.m., and the night shift guy just didn't show up. I offered my boss to work the double costs. I needed the money. At about 7 a.m. Sunday morning, an hour before I was due to knock off, and having been awake for 25 hours straight, a really bedraggled-looking trans hooker walked in. He wasn't a regular and looked like he'd been in a fight, probably with one of the regulars now that I think about it. They were a territorial lot. They asked for a pack of Pall Mall greens, and when I told them the price, they looked at me and said, "I've got no money." My sleep-deprived brain did a mental double-take, and I said, "What? Then what are you doing here?" He looked at me with a split, bloody lip and bruised face and said, "I could make it worth your while." My young, still borderline homophobic ass wasn't having any of that, and I yelled at him to get the F***CK out of the shop. Louder and more embarrassingly than was needed, probably, but at that point I just wasn't in the mood for any bullshit. A while later, a few weeks, probably, I walked into the toilet at about 1 a.m. to do my usual check and to pee, and there was a needle on the floor and blood all over the toilet. I walked out, locked the door, and put an out-of-order sign on it. I wasn't paid enough to deal with that shit. I had to deal with a lot of very angry hookers the rest of the night, who were forced to go clean up somewhere else. Got into a lot of very vocal slanging matches that night, but I told all of them that if they can't respect the facilities, they can't fucking use them. Oh yeah, and there was the time my manager got stabbed on my shift, in front of me, in the shop. But he was a massive racist and frankly deserved it. At about 3 a.m. one night, I had a woman come in. Insanely skinny, blonde thinning hair, and wearing what looked like pajamas. Nothing really out of the ordinary about her, so I only really glanced up as I buzzed her in, called out a quick greeting, and went back to cleaning. After about 2 to 3 minutes though, I look up, and she is standing about 4 feet from the counter, just staring at me. Completely blank, unwavering kind of stare. It startled me a little, and I asked her if I could help her with anything. But she didn't reply, and just continued to stare. She eventually began looking around the store, but she didn't take her eyes off me the entire time, even walking backwards at some points so she wouldn't break eye contact. After she grabs some things, she comes back to the counter, still staring but also muttering something under her breath. It was really hard to hear what she was saying, but I managed to make out a brand of smokes after getting her to repeat it several times. I get them for her, scan all her things, and she pays. Eyes still locked on me, and showing no emotional at all. It was getting pretty unnerving at this point, and I was looking forward to getting her out the door. As I'm handing over her change, though, she suddenly smiles, which would ease the tension if she didn't also start to laugh. It was a really raspy laugh, kind of a cross between that croaky noise the Grudge makes and a typical witch's laugh. Kind of a cackle, I guess. I tried not to react too much and told her to have a good night and took a few steps back from the counter. We were both kind of frozen, her laughing and me having no idea what to do. She continued her cackling and staring for a few minutes and then left, walking backwards again so she could keep looking at me. I felt really freaked out at that point, but figured she was probably just drunk or high or just had some stuff going on. She was outside now and had wandered off, so I went back to cleaning and tried to shake the whole moment off. I was out in the store mopping about an hour later when I heard a thud against the window. The whole front of our store is just glass panels, and the noise came from right beside me. I looked up and this damn woman is back. Her hand is pushed up against the window, and she is laughing again. I could just hear it as I was so close to the door. I must have really jumped at the sight of her because she seemed to get a kick out of it, laughing even more and smacking her hand on the window repeatedly. I thought bugger the mopping and went back behind the counter. I ended up staying in the back room where all of our security screens are and waiting for her to leave. It took around 45 minutes for her to clear off. The whole time just banging on the window and I assume still laughing. I'm really glad our doors are locked overnight because I wouldn't have liked to have been on the same side of the counter as her. I'm not sure what her deal was and I doubt she posed any real threat, but dang, it really freaked me out. I've seen her a few times since then, just wandering past on the footpath outside, but she has never come in or hung around again. My first job was at a local gas station. I was 18 and worked there for about 2 years, and it will always remain as the worst job I've ever had. I have quite a few stories, so I'll just list them as I remember them. For the record, I am a female. Yes, this is important. I would frequently be the only one to take out outside/inside trash. One night I was hauling my cart between pumps picking up loose garbage when a man, looking to be around late 20s, early 30s, approached me and asked if I had a boyfriend. Immediately feeling uncomfortable, I laughed nervously and said no, which I regret, but TBH I doubt saying yes would have made him leave me alone. He then proceeded to ask if I was 15, all while following me very, very closely. I told him no, dropped the handle of my cart, and went inside where I could be around people. I hid in the kitchen until he left. A man who was obviously high on something made me watch him try on cowboy hats while asking if he looked fashionable. He then proceeded to buy every single bottle of Pepsi we had. The cashier had to help him carry it out in boxes. He was with a random old white guy who kept running his hand up and down his back. It was strange, but luckily they seemed pretty harmless. Had a man whip out his cell phone and record us without our consent. He had read my name tag, and so he kept screaming across the store, "Hey, my name," and would not leave us alone. We had to call the cops. He then proceeded to try and get in a physical fight with one of our new cooks, who was a hot-headed teenager that I went to school with. It was a mess to say the least, but luckily no one got hurt. When I went to clean the bathrooms one night, I came across a regular who was pretty infamous for having sex with truckers outside in the parking lot and hanging around all hours of the day stealing things. She was really strange, but overall harmless. She was wearing a cheap wig that wasn't on properly and her face was bright red. She'd been crying. I tried to avoid her because it was an overall uncomfortable situation, but she called me over and asked if she was pretty. I told her she was because she seemed like she could use it. She smiled, cleaned up, and left. Didn't see her again after that until she returned a few months later with a shaved head. I worked at a small convenience store in the early 1990s. They had one of those fry delis that had chicken, corn dogs, burritos, etc. This particular night, I had run out of burritos and chicken. I also shut the thing down and cleaned it all out about an hour before closing. About 5 minutes before I was closing up, a guy walked in and asked for some burritos. I told him I was out of them and that I was just about to close and the fryer was shut down. He walked around the store for a minute. I assumed he was looking for something else to buy, and then he came up to the counter, pulled out a knife, and told me if I didn't cook him some burritos he was going to stab me. I freaked out, but told him I had none to cook. I showed him the freezer and told him I would happily cook anything he wanted from it, but I was out of burritos. He looked in it for a minute, turned to me and said, "You really are out?" I replied, "Yeah." He then put the knife away and left the store. Friday night, and the club closed early for some reason. Store is full of people and I am the only one there. Two guys start arguing in the middle of the store. It's not noticeable at first cause everyone is talking and loud since they would rather be at the club. All of a sudden it all goes quiet, and all you can hear is, "Motherfucker, what you think that gun gonna do? I will take that shit from you and kill you with your own shit." The entire store is dead quiet, and all attention is on these two dudes standing next to each other staring daggers at each other, waiting for someone to make a move. And behind the register, I look at both of them and say, fellas, wow fellas, and they both look at me. "Ayo, take it outside," I finish. One of the dudes looks at me, then looks at the other dude, then back to me and says in the calmest voice ever, "You right? We'll take it outside," and the two dudes go outside. The whole store breathes a sigh of relief. Not even 30 seconds later, gunshots go off, and everybody who isn't checking out or checking out soon leaves in a hurry. A few people just stand still. Minutes later, police, ambulances, and fire trucks all show up. No one visits my store the rest of the night. I never found out what officially happened. Some things you just don't ask about in the hood.